All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon, and in this video, we're going to talk about Keith one-time Thurman, the prediction that he gave for Errol Spence Jr., Terence Crawford, and what he said is next for him. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanon. In this video, we are talking about Errol Spence Jr., Terence Crawford, Keith Thurman. One-time Thurman, back from wherever Keith Thurman goes during these long layups that he has. Had an interview with Premier Boxing Champions on their podcast. Let people know what he thinks is coming next for him, and also his prediction for the Errol Spence Jr. Terence Crawford fight. But before I get into that, let me welcome you back to the channel. If you're new to the channel, thank you so much for watching the video. Please accept my invitation to subscribe and hit that bell icon so you can be notified of when we release more videos. Also, if you are a longtime subscriber and supporter of the channel, thank you so much for your support. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. Hit that share and hit that like button before you go. All right, so let's get into this. Keith one-time Thurman was interviewed by Premier Boxing Champions and talked about what is next for him, who he thinks he would be fighting next, and then gave what he thought would be the outcome of the Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford fight. So first things first, he talked about Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford, and what he said to me was a little bit shocking. Basically, what he said was, when I watched Errol Spence Jr. in his last fight against Yordenis Ugas, he looked slow. He looked slow of hand. I'm not sure if he meant that he looked slow of hand or he looked slow of foot. Can't tell you which one of the two it is. However, he said, look, he looked very slow to me, and it looked like Yordenis Ugas was way too defensive and really did not go about, taking the fight to Errol Spence Jr. enough. And as a result of that, Errol Spence Jr. won the fight. But if Errol is going to be fighting somebody like himself, Keith Thurman, or Terence Crawford, that he believes that hand speed is going to be an issue for Errol Spence Jr. He didn't come all the way out and say that he was going to predict Terence Crawford would win the fight. However, he pretty much leaned heavily on towards Terence Crawford because of the hand speed. Now, he said that, and this is really weird, man. Sometimes I don't get Keith Thurman, man. Keith Thurman says, that he has seen a lot of Errol, but he's not seen a lot of Terence Crawford, which to me would sound funny, seeing as these guys have both been, at the top level of the game for so long, that he wouldn't be familiar with Terence Crawford. But he said he thinks that Terence Crawford or somebody like himself has fast enough hands where they can get in between all of those shots that Errol Spence Jr. is throwing and make Errol Spence Jr. pay for throwing so many shots. However, he did not come out and straight out say that he thought Terence Crawford would win the fight, but I don't really think, I think if he leaned about as heavy into it as he possibly could be leaning into it. Now, as far as what he said he's going to do, he's basically saying, that he's got, he wants to come, he was supposed to come back in June or July. That's not going to happen because he got caught COVID again. So, it doesn't even really sound like he knows if he's going to fight, for the rest of this year. He said he was asked about Yordenis Ugas and whether or not he was going to fight Yordenis Ugas. And he basically sounded like he was open to fight Yordenis Ugas, and he thought that would be a good, matchup to see how he would do against Yordenis Ugas. And when you compare and so that people could compare how he performed against Yordenis Ugas to how Errol Spence Jr. compared to him, so it could be like, like a common opponent type of thing. So he sounded like he would be interested in that. But I'm telling you right now, as far as the conversation with Jaron Ennis went, man, he ducked and ran from that question about as fast as humanly possible. Basically was like, look, if I can't get a championship fight, I'm trying to move up to 147 pounds. I'm looking for the most exciting fights, the fights that everybody wants to have, but did everything he could do not to say the name of Jaron Ennis. So any talk of Keith Thurman trying to make that fight, I'm pretty much going to tell you right now, you guys can forget about that. Keith Thurman wants to get that fight with Errol Spence Jr., the Terence Crawford winner. And if he doesn't get that fight, he'll probably wind up fighting Yordenis Ugas or go up there and try to move up to 154 pounds. It's to see if he can get a fight at 154. I don't know, though. My take on the matter is that I don't know where he's going to go, because at 154 pounds, I don't know where he's going to get a shot at a belt at 154 pounds either. He more than likely is just going to have to sit around and wait for a vacant belt, for those guys to move up and get a vacant belt or fight for a vacant belt at 147, because both Errol and Terence Crawford said after that fight, those guys are trying to move up to 154 pounds. So you got Jermell Charlo with all of the belts that are there. He's got at least 2 mandatories lined up, one with Tim Tszyu and the other one with a guy with an Eastern European name. Not familiar, not sure, how to pronounce that guy's name, but it was somebody, I believe was the IBF, was supposed to be the IBF mandatory for Jermell Charlo, and basically Jermell set that fight to the side in order to get the fight with Brian Castano. So, right now there's a question about whether it's going to be the IBF mandatory or whether it's going to be the WBO mandatory, and Tim Tszyu going to be one of the two. But then after that, you also have guys like Sebastian Fundora that's in that weight class. That is close to being a mandatory. I think he's probably going to be the mandatory for the WBC. I wouldn't be surprised at all if the WBC whipped that out there on top of Jermell Charlo as fast as they could. So that's that situation right there. And then, of course, you have the WBO guy Terence Crawford, who's the super champion. And Terence Crawford, if he doesn't get that Terence Crawford fight, can probably go up there and force that fight either with Tim Tszyu, or if Tim Tszyu fights, maybe 2 fights out from that. So none of that, there's really not a lot of room for Keith Thurman, in any of those scenarios, honestly. So I'm not sure what he's going to do. I personally would love to see the fight between Errol Spence Jr. and Keith Thurman. I don't necessarily want to see Errol move up to 154 too quick, but he already said that that's what he wants to do. I know, however, that as long as Jermell Charlo holds a belt at 154, more than likely Errol's not going to be fighting for a belt. So maybe he'd just be taking, some cash cow type of fights, right? Where it's just he's at 154, but because, he's such a draw and such a big name, that he can set up several fights that are just non-title fights. For me, I would really prefer just to see him stay at 147 and fight Keith Thurman, but a whole bunch of people disagree with me on that, especially Errol Spence Jr. fans who say, Keith Thurman blew that opportunity by not fighting him when he had the opportunity when he was the WBA and the WBC champion. But, anyway, it is what it is. You let me know what you think in the comment section. And with that, I'm out. Deuces.